The parking lot of the suburban mall lay quiet under the soft hues of dusk. The fading sunlight painting the asphalt in shades of orange and gold. It was the kind of scene that exuded stillness. A moment where life seemed to pause between the bustle of day and the quiet of night. Zara Mitchell worked methodically. Her hands steady as she secured the last piece of her equipment into the back of her truck. The faint clink of metal against metal echoed softly. A sound that seemed to blend seamlessly into the hush of the evening. Zara had spent the day inspecting the mall's fire safety systems, a tedious but necessary task. She knew the risks of cutting corners. Of outdated sprinklers and poorly maintained extinguishers. Fires didn't wait for convenience or compliance, they simply consumed. It was her job to ensure that didn't happen. To spot the flaws and raise the alarm before disaster struck. Yet, as was so often the case, her warnings had been met with polite indifference. "We'll look into it," the mall manager had said. His tone as thin and dismissive as the paperwork Zara had handed him. She wasn't angry, frustration had long since become an old companion. The indifference she encountered wasn't personal, it was a reflection of something larger. A quiet undercurrent of assumptions about what mattered and what didn't. And people like Zara, who worked in the background, unnoticed, often found their warnings relegated to the periphery of concern. Zara straightened, brushing her hands against her safety vest, which had collected a thin film of dust during the day's work. The vest itself was almost a uniform for invisibility, a neon shield that told the world she was there but not to be seen. To most, she was just another worker in a reflective vest, performing a task they wouldn't think about unless something went wrong. The parking lot was nearly empty now. A handful of cars dotted the expanse, their owners likely lingering over last-minute shopping or dinner plans. Zara's gaze swept across the space, her eyes pausing briefly on a patrol car parked at the far edge. The faint glow of its headlights cut through the gathering twilight. She barely noticed it, her focus returning to her task, a habit honed over years of navigating spaces where she was neither fully acknowledged nor entirely invisible. Zara climbed into the back of her truck, her movements deliberate as she checked the straps on the fire extinguishers. Each one heavier than it appeared. The weight was familiar, comforting even. These tools were her trade. The tangible proof of a career built on precision and care. She adjusted the final latch and stepped back. Her work complete. The air was warm, the remnants of the day's heat lingering even as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Zara paused, resting her hands on her hips as she took in the quiet. There was something grounding about these moments. The simple satisfaction of finishing a job. Yet, beneath the calm, a tension lingered, a subtle but persistent sense that the world around her was never as straightforward as it seemed. In the distance, the patrol car door opened. The sound was faint but carried across the stillness, drawing her attention. Zara watched as a man stepped out, his silhouette framed by the glow of the streetlights. He moved with deliberate purpose, his steps slow but direct. The kind of movement that hinted at authority. It wasn't unusual to see security or law enforcement in these places. But something about his presence felt off, like a disturbance in the natural rhythm of the evening. Zara turned back to her truck, not wanting to assume anything but also not ignoring the subtle prickle of unease that settled in her chest. The faint echo of his footsteps grew louder, closing the space between them. She knew that sound too well. She had heard it in different forms, in different places. It was the sound of someone approaching. Not out of curiosity or kindness, but out of suspicion. She adjusted her posture, smoothing her expression into one of neutral calm. She had learned, over the years, that this was the best way to navigate encounters like these. Stay polite. Stay professional. And hope that it's enough to defuse whatever assumptions might be at play. As the man neared, Zara turned to face him fully, offering a small, practiced smile. The evening air hung heavy between them. A quiet backdrop to the moment that was about to unfold. "Evening, officer," she said. Her voice steady. Her words carefully chosen. "Can I help you with something?" The officer stopped a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over her and the truck behind her. His expression was unreadable, but Zara could sense the skepticism in the way his eyes lingered on her equipment. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His tone clipped, devoid of the warmth that might accompany genuine concern. Zara's smile faltered slightly, but she held her ground. "Just finishing up a job," she replied, gesturing to the truck. "Fire safety inspection at the mall. Long day." The officer's posture stiffened, his hand resting near his utility belt. Zara could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, a quiet suspicion that seemed to grow with every passing second. She knew that look too. It was the look of someone trying to piece together a story they had already decided wasn't quite right. And in that moment, Zara felt the quiet weight of something larger pressing down the unspoken divide that had shaped so many of her experiences. She wasn't just a fire safety expert finishing her work, she was someone standing under a spotlight she hadn't asked for. The faint hum of scrutiny rising like static in the air. Her smile returned. Softer now, but no less steady. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked. Her tone light, as if the answer didn't matter. But it did. It always did. The air between them hung still, the kind of quiet that demanded attention. Officer Daniel Horton shifted his weight, the subtle creak of his belt interrupting the silence. His gaze, steady and unblinking, swept over Zara and her truck as if searching for something unseen, something untoward. Zara remained where she stood, her hands resting calmly at her sides, her expression a practiced blend of patience and professionalism. "I asked." Horton began again, his tone measured but edged with something sharper. "What you're doing here?" Zara had faced many questions like this over the years. They usually came wrapped in the same suspicion, the same unspoken implication that her presence in certain spaces required explanation. It wasn't new, but it never felt less heavy. She offered a small, composed smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes but softened the edges of the moment. "As I said, officer, I just finished a fire safety inspection at the mall," she explained, gesturing toward her truck. "I'm with Metro Fire Safety Consultants." Horton's eyes narrowed slightly, his skepticism unyielding. His hand drifted toward his utility belt, not threateningly but purposefully, as if the motion itself conveyed his authority. Zara noticed, of course, but made no acknowledgement. It wasn't the first time she'd seen that kind of movement, the subtle display of power, a quiet reminder of control. "That's quite a bit of equipment," Horton remarked, nodding toward the fire extinguishers and tools secured in the back of the truck. "Not the kind of thing you see every day. Especially not this late." Zara resisted the urge to sigh, keeping her voice even. "It's standard for my work," she replied. "Fire safety inspections require a range of tools. Sometimes the job runs late." She reached into her pocket and retrieved her ID, holding it out for him to see. "You're welcome to verify." Horton took the badge but barely glanced at it, his suspicion unshaken. To him, the badge was a prop, a detail that didn't quite fit the picture he'd already painted in his mind. He handed it back without a word, his eyes now fixed on Zara's face. The silence stretched thin between them, charged with unspoken tension. Zara knew this dance well, the way assumptions could twist something as mundane as unloading equipment into an interrogation. She had learned, through years of navigating these moments, that her demeanor mattered as much as her words. Calm, clear, unthreatening. It was a script she hadn't written but had been forced to memorize nonetheless. "You know," Horton said finally, his tone growing more pointed, "this doesn't look right. A truck full of industrial equipment. Someone working alone at this hour. You can see how that might raise questions." Zara tilted her head slightly, her brow furrowing in a way that conveyed both understanding and subtle challenge. "I understand your concern," she said carefully. "But as I've said, I'm here doing my job. If you need confirmation, the mall management can vouch for me. They're the ones who hired me." Horton didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his presence looming just enough to be felt. His posture stiffened, and Zara caught the faintest flicker of something in his expression: doubt. Perhaps. Or something deeper. Less tangible. He was assessing her, not just as a worker or a woman standing in a parking lot, but as something else entirely. Zara didn't flinch under his scrutiny. She stood firm, her gaze steady but unchallenging. The officer finally spoke, his voice quieter but no less weighted. "This area doesn't see much activity after dark. You can't blame me for being cautious." There it was, the veil of civility barely concealing the undercurrent of bias. Caution. Zara thought. The word often carried more weight than it should, more implication than it claimed. It wasn't caution that brought Horton here, it was assumption. The kind of assumption that saw her vest and truck and presence as something requiring explanation. Something potentially out of place. "No," Zara replied, her tone still measured, though a trace of weariness seeped into her words. "I can't blame you for being cautious. But I'd hope you trust the information I've given you." Horton's jaw tightened slightly, a motion so small it might have gone unnoticed. But Zara saw it, felt the way the air seemed to grow heavier around them. It wasn't just about caution anymore. It was about control. About authority. About something that neither of them had named but both understood too well. He shifted again, glancing toward the equipment in the truck once more. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. Though the question was less a request and more an assertion. The kind of question that didn't leave room for a no. Zara hesitated. Not because she had anything to hide, but because she knew what this was: an escalation wrapped in formality. She met his gaze, her voice firm but not confrontational. "Everything in that truck is accounted for," she said. "And if you'd like to verify, I have the paperwork." Horton's expression hardened, his skepticism deepening. Zara could see the moment shift, the quiet pivot from inquiry to something sharper. She felt the weight of it pressing against her. The unspoken accusation that lingered in the officer's eyes. The parking lot, vast and empty, seemed to shrink around them. The shadows stretched longer as the last traces of sunlight slipped below the horizon. Zara remained where she stood, her calm demeanor masking the quiet frustration that simmered beneath the surface. This wasn't new. It wasn't unfamiliar. But it was exhausting. All the same. The same script. The same unspoken questions. The same quiet dance of assumption and defense. Zara held her ground, her voice steady, her presence unyielding. This wasn't the first time she had been here. It wouldn't be the last. And yet, each time, it felt heavier. The air in the parking lot seemed to thicken. The quiet interrupted only by the faint hum of a distant car engine and the rhythmic chirp of cicadas. Zara Mitchell adjusted her stance. Her body language calm but poised. Officer Daniel Horton stood just a few feet away, his hand resting casually on his utility belt, though the gesture spoke of readiness more than ease. "You're awfully composed for someone in your position," Horton remarked, his tone carrying the faintest edge of accusation. His eyes fixed on Zara, searching her expression for any flicker of unease. When none came, his jaw tightened, a subtle signal of his growing irritation. "My position?" Zara replied, her voice even, though the words carried the faintest note of incredulity. "Officer, I've explained why I'm here and provided my credentials. I'm not sure what more you're looking for." Horton didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze drifted back to the open truck, its contents neatly arranged and secured. To anyone else, the equipment might have seemed innocuous fire extinguishers, tools, inspection kits. But to Horton, it seemed they represented something more. Something suspicious. Zara could see the wheels turning in his mind, could feel the weight of his assumptions pressing against her. "This kind of equipment," he said finally, gesturing toward the truck, "could be dangerous in the wrong hands. You have to understand why I'd be concerned." Zara's lips pressed into a thin line, though her expression remained neutral. "It could be," she acknowledged. "But it's not. I'm a licensed fire safety consultant. And everything here is accounted for. If you'd like, I can call my employer or the mall management to confirm." Her words were measured, deliberate, an effort to diffuse the tension she could feel building between them. But Horton's posture stiffened, his hand shifting slightly on his belt. It was a small movement, one that might have seemed inconsequential to an outside observer. But to Zara, it was a signal, a quiet assertion of authority. A reminder of who held power in this exchange. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Horton said, his tone sharper now. "I'm asking you simple questions. All I need are straightforward answers." Zara's patience, carefully maintained until now, began to fray at the edges. She had answered his questions. She had provided her credentials, explained her presence, and offered additional verification. And yet, none of it seemed to satisfy him. She knew why. Of course, this wasn't just about the equipment or her being in the parking lot after hours. It was about something unspoken. A deeper undercurrent of mistrust that had nothing to do with her work and everything to do with how she was perceived. "Officer," she said, her voice steady but firm, "I've given you all the information you need. If there's something specific you're concerned about, I'm happy to address it. But if not, I'd like to finish packing up and head home." Horton's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with an unspoken tension that neither of them acknowledged aloud. For a moment, it seemed as though he might back down, might accept her explanation and let her go. But then he took a step closer, his presence looming just enough to unsettle. "I don't like the look of this," he said, gesturing toward the truck. "And I don't like the attitude. Step away from the vehicle." Zara's breath caught, though she masked it with practiced composure. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but laced with disbelief. "There's nothing here that warrants this level of suspicion. Everything is in order." Horton's expression darkened, his hand now fully resting on the grip of his baton. "I said, step away from the vehicle," he repeated, his voice firmer now, brooking no argument. For a moment, Zara considered her options. She could comply. Could step back and allow him to rifle through her equipment. To assert his authority unchecked. But the thought left a bitter taste in her mouth. She had done nothing wrong. Given him no reason to treat her with such mistrust. And yet, here she was. Forced to defend her right to simply exist in this space. "Officer," she said. Her voice quiet but resolute. "This equipment is expensive and sensitive. I can't allow it to be mishandled. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I won't step away and let you damage my property." The words hung in the air. A quiet act of defiance that seemed to only deepen the tension. Horton's grip on his baton tightened. His posture rigid with frustration. Zara could see the conflict in his eyes. The way his need to assert control warred with the reality that she was standing her ground. "You don't make the rules here," Horton said. His voice low but charged. "This isn't up for debate." And there it was, the quiet truth beneath the surface of their interaction. This wasn't about rules or safety or caution. It was about control. About the unspoken dynamics that shaped encounters like this every day. Zara held his gaze. Her expression unwavering. Even as the weight of the moment settled heavily on her shoulders. "I'm not trying to debate," she said. Her voice calm but firm. "I'm just trying to do my job." But even as she spoke, Zara knew that her words weren't enough. They never were. The tension between them was more than situational, it was systemic. A reflection of the quiet but pervasive barriers that colored her experiences time and time again. The parking lot, once quiet and unremarkable, now felt charged with something heavier. And as the evening stretched on, Zara realized that this encounter was far from over. It was only just beginning. The stillness of the parking lot broke with the subtle shift of authority. Officer Daniel Horton's stance grew more rigid. His shoulders squared. As if the space around them needed to be claimed. Zara Mitchell watched him carefully. Her instincts quietly at work. She had encountered figures like him before, individuals who carried their authority like armor. Wielding it not as protection, but as a weapon. The silence between them was heavy. Yet Zara's voice remained steady as she replied. "I've told you everything I know. Officer. This equipment is part of my job. If you're concerned, I can provide more paperwork. But there's no need to." "Step back," Horton interrupted. His words sharp. He motioned toward the truck. His hand grazing the baton on his belt. Not as a threat, but as a reminder. "I'm going to take a look." Zara's pulse quickened. Though her expression betrayed none of it. The scene was too familiar, the quiet erosion of reason under the weight of assumption. She thought about the extinguishers in the truck. How their red surfaces gleamed faintly under the streetlights. Tools of safety. Now caught in a moment that felt anything but safe. "Officer," Zara said. Carefully measured. "This equipment isn't dangerous unless mishandled. If you touch that fire extinguisher without knowing how it works." Horton cut her off again. "I don't need a lecture," he snapped. "Step back and let me do my job." Zara took a breath. Her hands at her sides in a posture of quiet calm. She knew this was a moment that could tip in either direction. Compliance was the easier path. The one that might let her leave unscathed. But the weight of his scrutiny, the subtle injustice of it, made her hesitate. "I'm not trying to stop you from doing your job," she replied. Her voice low and steady. "I'm trying to prevent an accident. Fire extinguishers aren't toys." Her words hung in the air. But Horton's expression hardened further. Authority, once questioned, often bristled. He stepped closer to the truck. his fingers now brushing the edge of one of the extinguishers. Zara's heart tightened as she watched. He wasn't listening. Or perhaps he was. But he was determined to assert himself regardless. Careful. Zara warned. Instinct overriding hesitation. That's pressurized. The words barely left her mouth before Horton's hand shifted, gripping the extinguisher's handle. His movements were confident but uninformed. And in an instant, a loud hiss filled the air. A burst of white powder erupted from the nozzle, spreading in an uneven cloud around them. Zara stepped back reflexively, coughing as the fine particles filled her lungs and stung her eyes. Horton, caught in the chaos of his own creation, fumbled with the extinguisher, his grip slipping. The scene was both absurd and unnerving, a moment of unintended escalation born from the officer's insistence on control. "Stop," Zara said, her voice firmer now, cutting through the haze of powder. "Put it down before someone gets hurt." But Horton, blinded and startled, tightened his grip instead. His pride clearly overriding caution. Zara stepped forward without thinking, her hands moving deftly to wrest the extinguisher from his grip. Her years of training guided her movements, calculated, precise, and without malice. Horton stumbled slightly as the extinguisher left his hands, and Zara set it down carefully on the asphalt, her breathing heavy but controlled. For a moment, there was stillness. The white cloud began to settle, blanketing the ground in a fine layer of powder. Horton stood a few feet away, his chest heaving, his face a mixture of humiliation and anger. Zara met his gaze, her expression unyielding but calm. "You didn't need to do that," she said, her tone even. "I told you it wasn't safe." Her words, though factual, seemed to strike a deeper nerve. Horton's jaw tightened, his hand moving instinctively toward his utility belt once more. Zara's eyes followed the motion, her body tensing. She had seen this before, the moment when frustration gave way to something more dangerous, when logic was eclipsed by a need to reassert power. "You're out of line," Horton said, his voice low and cold. "You think you can talk your way out of this? Think again." Zara held her ground, her hands raised slightly in a gesture of calm. "I'm not trying to talk my way out of anything," she replied. "I'm asking you to step back and think about what just happened." But Horton wasn't listening. His pride, now bruised, seemed to propel him forward. He took a step closer, his presence looming. Zara felt the shift in the air, the weight of unspoken tension pressing against her chest. This wasn't just about a fire extinguisher or a late-night inspection. It was about power and perception. About the silent narratives that so often dictated who was believed and who wasn't. "Step away from the truck," Horton barked, his voice louder now, cutting through the quiet night. "Hands where I can see them." Zara hesitated. Not because she didn't understand the gravity of his words, but because she understood it too well. The moment had spiraled into something neither of them had intended. Yet she bore the weight of its consequences alone. She took a step back, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes never leaving Horton's. "This isn't necessary," she said, her voice quieter now, though no less resolute. "I'm not a threat to you." Horton didn't respond. His gaze burned with frustration, his hand hovering near his baton as though it were an anchor. Zara's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain still, her breath steady. She couldn't afford to be anything but calm. Not now. The parking lot, once so quiet and unremarkable, now felt charged with something larger than either of them. And as the moment stretched, Zara realized that this encounter was no longer just about her or Horton. It was about something deeper, something woven into the fabric of their lives. Unspoken but undeniable. And in that moment, she made a silent decision: she wouldn't let it define her. The faint white haze from the discharged fire extinguisher hung in the air, settling on the ground like an unwelcome fog. It muted the harsh outlines of the parking lot, turning it into a surreal stage where two figures stood in a tense, silent standoff. Zara Mitchell kept her hands visible, her posture calm but alert. Officer Daniel Horton, his face streaked with powder, took a slow, deliberate step forward. His jaw set tight and his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. "You've got a lot of nerve," Horton said, his voice low, almost a growl. His eyes were fixed on her now, his frustration and embarrassment simmering just beneath the surface. To him, this wasn't about a mishandled extinguisher anymore, it was about control. About salvaging a sense of authority that had slipped through his fingers. Zara could feel the shift. The situation had moved beyond a simple misunderstanding. Horton wasn't reacting to her explanations or her credentials. He was reacting to her presence. To the quiet refusal in her stance. To the way she had resisted being reduced to something small and suspect. It wasn't new, this feeling. But it weighed heavy all the same. "Officer," Zara began, keeping her tone neutral. "No one needs to get hurt here. I've told you why I'm here. I've explained everything. This doesn't need to escalate further." Horton's hand hovered near his belt again, and Zara's stomach tightened at the sight. His movements weren't rushed, but there was a tension in them that made her muscles coil with quiet anticipation. She had seen this kind of behavior before, not just from officers, but from anyone who felt cornered by their own mistakes. It wasn't about facts anymore. It was about pride. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" Horton asked, his voice sharper now. He took another step closer, his presence looming larger with each inch of ground he claimed. "You think you can just stand there and tell me how to do my job?" Zara didn't move. She kept her gaze steady, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not telling you how to do your job, officer. I'm asking you to consider what's happening here. I've cooperated with you, but you're treating me like a criminal." The words landed between them like a weight, the truth of them undeniable. But Horton didn't flinch. If anything, her calm seemed to aggravate him further. His hand closed around the baton at his belt, the metallic click of it extending sharp in the silence. Zara's heart quickened, though she refused to let the fear show. "Get on the ground," Horton ordered, his voice rising. "Now." Zara took a slow step back, her hands still raised. She could feel the rough texture of the asphalt beneath her boots, the faint scrape of gravel grounding her in the moment. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm not a threat to you. And you know it." Horton's face flushed with anger. "This isn't a debate," he barked. "You don't get to decide how this goes." And there it was, the unspoken truth laid bare. This wasn't about the extinguisher or the truck or the late hour. It was about power. About who held it and who didn't. Zara felt it pressing against her. The weight of assumptions and expectations that had followed her in quiet moments like this for years. "I'm not trying to decide anything," she said softly. "I'm just trying to stay safe." The baton moved suddenly. A flash of movement that sent a sharp jolt of adrenaline through Zara's chest. Horton didn't swing it, not yet, but the threat was clear. His body was tense, his eyes narrow, and his grip on control tenuous at best. Zara stepped back again. Her breathing steady despite the thrum of her pulse. You don't listen. Do you? Horton said. His voice quieter now. But no less menacing. He raised the baton slightly. A gesture that felt more like a promise than a warning. You're going to regret this. Zara's patience, so carefully maintained until now, began to fray. She could feel the edges of her calm unraveling under the weight of his anger. But she knew she couldn't give in to the frustration. Not here. Not now. Not when so much depended on her ability to stay composed. Officer Horton, she said. Her voice steady but firm. You're making a mistake. Please just think about what you're doing. Her words seemed to strike a nerve. Horton's eyes flashed. His body shifting forward as if propelled by her defiance. Zara moved instinctively. Her training guiding her steps as she sidestepped his advance. The baton came down hard, striking the air where she had been moments before. Horton stumbled slightly, his footing faltering on the powder-slick asphalt. Zara acted quickly, her hands moving to intercept his next motion. She wasn't thinking about winning or losing, about pride or power. She was thinking about safety, hers, his, everyone's. Her grip found the extinguisher again, its weight familiar and solid in her hands. She raised it defensively, her movements measured and precise. Stop, she said. Her voice sharper now, cutting through the tense silence. You're going to hurt yourself or someone else. But Horton wasn't listening. His frustration had blinded him to reason. His need to reassert control overriding any sense of caution. He lunged again, his movements wild and uncoordinated. Zara stepped back, keeping the extinguisher between them like a barrier. Her heart pounding in her chest. The parking lot, once quiet and unremarkable, now felt like a battlefield. The haze of extinguisher powder hung in the air. A pale cloud that seemed to absorb the tension of the moment. Zara's breath came in steady bursts, her body taut with readiness. And then it happened. Horton's foot caught on the edge of the curb, his balance tipping forward. His hands flailed, reaching for stability that wasn't there. He hit the ground hard, the baton clattering away from him with a metallic ring. Zara stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing to process what had just happened. She lowered the extinguisher slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. Horton groaned. His body curled slightly on the ground, his face contorted with pain and anger. Zara didn't move closer. She didn't trust him, not yet. Stay down, she said, her voice firm but not unkind. This needs to stop. But even as she spoke, she could see it in his eyes, the refusal to let go. The need to reclaim something he believed he'd lost. And Zara knew, with a sinking certainty, that this was far from over. The red and blue lights of the approaching patrol car sliced through the haze of the parking lot, their rhythmic flashes reflecting off the white powder that had settled over the scene. Zara Mitchell stood near her truck, the fire extinguisher at her feet, her hands raised slightly in a gesture of compliance. Across from her, Officer Daniel Horton was struggling to push himself up from the ground, his movements slow and labored. The wail of the sirens faded as the patrol car came to a stop, the tires crunching against the asphalt. Two officers stepped out, their hands hovering near their holsters as they took in the scene. Their eyes moved between Zara and Horton, assessing the tension that still hung heavy in the air. I'm unarmed, Zara called out, her voice calm but clear. I'm the one who called for assistance. The officers exchanged a glance before one of them approached her. his expression cautious but neutral. The other moved toward Horton, who had managed to sit up, his face pale and streaked with exhaustion and anger. "Stay where you are," the officer said as he neared Zara, his tone steady but firm. "What happened here?" Zara kept her posture open, her voice measured. "I was finishing up a job when Officer Horton approached me. He became aggressive, and I tried to explain my work and provide identification. But things escalated. I defended myself." The officer's gaze flickered to the fire extinguisher on the ground, then back to Zara. "Defended yourself? How?" Zara gestured toward Horton, who was now gesturing animatedly to the second officer. "He tried to use force against me. He grabbed the extinguisher, mishandled it. And when I took it back to prevent further damage, he threatened me. I had no choice but to protect myself." The officer's eyes narrowed slightly, not in disbelief but in scrutiny. "Do you have any proof of what you're saying?" Zara nodded toward her truck. "There's a dashcam in my vehicle. It should have captured most of what happened." The second officer, meanwhile, was speaking to Horton, whose voice was strained but insistent. "She assaulted me," Horton said, his words clipped. "She resisted and attacked me with that extinguisher." The first officer turned toward his partner. "Check his injuries," he said before looking back at Zara. "We'll need to review the footage. For now, stay where you are." Zara nodded, her hands lowering slightly but remaining visible. She watched as the officer moved to her truck, retrieving the dashcam's memory card. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly at the thought of the footage, a silent witness that might offer her some measure of protection. Horton, however, seemed undeterred. His voice carried across the parking lot, filled with anger and wounded pride. "She doesn't belong here," he spat. "She's lying. She's been lying from the start." The words stung, though Zara refused to let them show. She had heard similar accusations before, their meaning more layered than the words themselves. It wasn't just about her presence in the parking lot or the tools in her truck. It was about her existence in a space that some believed wasn't hers to occupy. The officer who had been questioning Horton approached his partner, speaking in hushed tones. Zara couldn't hear what was said, but she saw the way the second officer's gaze flicked toward her, his expression briefly unreadable. Moments later, he turned back to Horton. "We're calling for medical assistance," he said. "You've been injured, and we need to get you checked out." Horton waved him off, his frustration evident. "I'm fine," he snapped. "What you need to do is arrest her." The second officer didn't respond immediately. Instead, he motioned for Horton to stay seated and turned his attention back to Zara. "We're going to sort this out," he said, his tone neither accusing nor reassuring. Zara nodded, though the weight of the moment pressed heavily against her. She had done everything she could to keep the situation from spiraling out of control. But the narrative was no longer hers to shape. It rested now in the hands of others, strangers who would decide what story to believe. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the officers reviewed the footage. Zara remained by her truck, her posture steady but her mind racing. Horton's accusations echoed in her thoughts, their venom a reminder of how easily the truth could be twisted. Finally, the first officer approached her, his expression less guarded than before. "We've reviewed the dashcam footage," he said. "It supports your account." Relief washed over Zara, though she kept her reaction measured. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I just want this to be resolved fairly." The officer nodded, his gaze softening slightly. "We'll need a full statement from you," he said. This isn't over yet. But for now, you're free to go. As he spoke, the paramedics arrived, their lights adding another layer of urgency to the scene. Horton was reluctant to accept their help, his pride clearly wounded. But eventually, he allowed them to assist him onto a stretcher. Zara watched as he was loaded into the ambulance, his eyes meeting hers briefly. There was no acknowledgement in his gaze, only a smoldering anger that spoke of unfinished business. She held his stare for a moment before turning back to the officer. "I'll be available for any further questions," she said, her voice calm but resolute. The officer gave a brief nod before stepping away. Zara stood alone for a moment, the weight of the night finally settling over her. The parking lot, now scattered with the remnants of the confrontation, felt both expansive and confining. As she climbed into her truck and started the engine, Zara let out a slow, steadying breath. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she would not let this define her. The truth was out there now, and she would stand by it, no matter the cost. The ride home was quiet, the faint hum of the engine filling the space where Zara's thoughts churned silently. The streets, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, felt empty, almost unnervingly still. It was the kind of stillness that amplified the echoes of the night, each moment replaying in her mind with sharp clarity. She had faced confrontation before, but something about this one felt heavier, as though it carried the weight of far more than just her actions. She pulled into her driveway, her hands gripping the steering wheel for a moment before she allowed herself to relax. The house stood as it always had, a modest but comforting presence that seemed to ground her in the reality she had fought to protect. Zara sat there, the engine ticking as it cooled, her gaze fixed on the porch light that flickered faintly. The night had been chaotic, yes, but it was the undercurrent of the encounter that lingered, unspoken words, assumptions steeped in something more complex than the actions themselves. Horton's anger, his relentless need to control the narrative, wasn't just about the situation at hand. It was about the quiet, pervasive tensions that colored encounters like these, shaped by biases that were rarely acknowledged outright but always felt. Zara stepped out of the truck, her movements deliberate as she closed the door behind her. The night air was cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the heat of the parking lot confrontation. She walked up the steps, each one a reminder of the grounding force of home, of safety. But even as she unlocked the door and stepped inside, the weight of the night followed her. The kitchen was quiet, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Zara leaned against the counter, her hands resting on the smooth surface as she let the silence settle around her. The encounter with Horton replayed in her mind not the chaos of the extinguisher or the blinding white powder, but the way he had looked at her. The way his words had carried an unspoken challenge. "You don't belong here." The phrase wasn't new. It had been delivered in countless ways over the years, from the subtle to the overt. Zara had grown accustomed to its many forms, but it never lost its sting. It was a reminder that, to some, her presence was an anomaly, something that required justification. She turned on the faucet, the rush of water filling the sink as she rinsed her hands. The act was routine, almost mechanical, but it grounded her. It reminded her that she was still here, still standing, despite the weight of the night. As the water ran over her skin, she thought about Horton, about the way his frustration had consumed him. It wasn't just anger she had seen in his eyes, it was fear. A quiet but persistent fear of losing control. Zara dried her hands and moved to the living room, sinking into the familiar comfort of the couch. She reached for her phone. Its smooth surface cool in her palm. And opened her email. A part of her wanted to reach out to her employer. To document the incident in her own words before anyone else could twist the narrative. But she paused. Her thumb hovering over the screen. The truth was. She was tired. Tired of the constant need to defend herself. To prove her intentions. Her worth. Her existence in spaces where she was so often questioned. The weight of it pressed against her chest. A quiet but insistent reminder of the battles she had fought and would likely continue to fight. She set the phone down and leaned back. Her eyes closing briefly. In the stillness of the room. The memories of the night began to take shape in a different way. It wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what it represented. The subtle, insidious ways in which power dynamics played out. The way Horton had seen her not as a professional, but as something to be challenged. Zara opened her eyes. Her gaze settling on the faint shadows that danced across the ceiling. She thought about the officers who had arrived. The way they had handled the situation with cautious professionalism. It had been a small relief. But it wasn't enough to erase the underlying tension. Even with the dashcam footage supporting her account. She knew the battle wasn't over. There would be questions. Investigations. And, likely, assumptions she would need to counter. Her thoughts shifted to Horton. She wondered if, in the quiet of his own home, he was reflecting on the night the way she was. Did he see the moment for what it was? Did he recognize the lines he had crossed? The biases that had driven him? Or would he double down? Clinging to his version of events. Unwilling to face the discomfort of introspection. Zara didn't have an answer. And perhaps she never would. But she knew that her role in this wasn't just about defending herself, it was about standing firm in the truth. She had acted with integrity. And she would continue to do so. No matter how difficult the path ahead might be. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Each sound a reminder of the passing time. Zara stood and moved to the window. Pulling back the curtain to look out at the quiet street. The world outside seemed so still. So removed from the chaos of the night. Yet. She knew that beneath the surface. The same tensions lingered. Woven into the fabric of everyday life. As she stood there. The weight of the night began to shift. It didn't disappear, it never truly did, but it settled into something she could carry. Zara knew the road ahead would be challenging. But she also knew she had the strength to face it. For now. That was enough. The morning sunlight filtered through Zara Mitchell's living room window. Casting soft streaks of light across the floor. She sat at the kitchen table. A steaming mug of coffee in her hands. Staring at the notes she had jotted down the night before. Each word was deliberate. A careful recounting of the confrontation in the parking lot. She had written it not just for her own clarity but to ensure her account remained intact. Uncolored by the perspectives of others who might seek to distort it. The world outside seemed to hum with its usual rhythm, cars passing by. Birds chirping in the distance. It was a sharp contrast to the quiet turmoil that lingered within her. Zara felt the weight of the task ahead, not just clearing her name. But challenging a narrative that had been shaped long before she entered that parking lot. The phone rang. Breaking her train of thought. Zara picked it up. Her voice steady as she greeted the officer on the other end. It was the same woman who had taken her statement the night before. Her tone professional but not unfriendly. "We've reviewed the footage and your account," the officer said. "It's clear you acted in self-defense. But there will still be an investigation. Officer Horton has filed a complaint. And these things take time." Zara's fingers tightened slightly around the phone. She had expected this. Of course. But hearing it out loud made the reality feel heavier. "I understand," she replied. "I'll cooperate fully. I just want the truth to come out." The officer paused, her voice softening. "For what it's worth. The evidence supports you. Stay prepared. But don't lose heart." After the call ended, Zara leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting to the window. She thought about the officer's words. About the layers of systems and perceptions that dictated moments like these. It wasn't just about her encounter with Horton, it was about the countless others who had faced similar scrutiny. The stories that went untold or were dismissed outright. Underscore 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 underscore. By midday, Zara found herself driving back to the mall. The management had requested a meeting. Not to discuss the safety inspection but to address the incident. The building loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting the bright sun. As she parked, Zara took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. The mall manager, a middle-aged man with a polite but distant demeanor, greeted her with a handshake that felt more performative than genuine. He ushered her into his office, where another individual, a lawyer, Zara guessed, sat waiting. "We're aware of what happened," the manager began, his tone carefully neutral. "It's an unfortunate situation, and we want to ensure everything is handled appropriately." Zara nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "I appreciate that. I trust the footage will speak for itself." The manager exchanged a glance with the lawyer before continuing. "Of course. But we also want to protect the mall's reputation. The situation has drawn some attention, and we need to navigate this carefully." The implication was clear. The mall wanted to distance itself from the controversy, to frame the incident as an anomaly rather than a reflection of deeper issues. Zara listened, her face composed, though a flicker of frustration simmered beneath the surface. She had seen this kind of deflection before, a quiet attempt to shift focus without addressing the root of the problem. "I understand your concerns," Zara said after a moment. "But this isn't just about reputations. It's about accountability. What happened last night shouldn't have escalated the way it did." The manager nodded, his expression tightening slightly. "We'll cooperate fully with the investigation, Ms. Mitchell. But we trust you'll also handle this matter with discretion." Zara held his gaze, her voice steady. "Discretion doesn't mean silence. The truth matters. And I won't compromise on that." Underscore 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 underscore. The drive home felt longer than it should have, the weight of the meeting lingering in Zara's mind. She thought about how easily the narrative could be shaped by those with power. How often the truth was buried beneath layers of convenience and self-preservation. But she also thought about the officer who had believed her. The dashcam footage that had captured what words alone could not. As she parked in her driveway, Zara noticed her neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Hargrove, tending to her garden. The two exchanged a wave, and Zara decided to walk over, feeling the need for a conversation that wasn't tied to conflict. "Morning, Zara," Mrs. Hargrove greeted, wiping her hands on her apron. You're up and about early. Had a meeting. Zara replied with a small smile. Just one of those days. Mrs. Hargrove nodded knowingly. Her eyes sharp despite her years. I saw the lights last night. Thought something might have happened. Zara hesitated for a moment before replying. Her tone quiet. It was an incident. One of those situations where being in the wrong place at the wrong time feels like enough to put you under a spotlight. Mrs. Hargrove paused. Her expression thoughtful. Those situations, she said slowly, are never just about the moment. Are they? Always something bigger underneath. Zara nodded, appreciating the understanding in her neighbor's words. It's exhausting, she admitted. Feeling like you have to explain yourself for simply being there. Mrs. Hargrove reached out, her hand resting gently on Zara's arm. You don't have to explain anything to me, dear. I've seen enough in my time to know the difference between what's right and what's easy. Don't let them take your truth. The words stayed with Zara long after she returned to her house. She sat by the window, watching the sunlight fade into dusk. The sky painted in soft hues of orange and pink. The fight wasn't over, she knew that. There would be more questions. More scrutiny. More moments where her truth would feel like a fragile thing. But she also knew she wasn't alone in this. The threads of her experience were woven into a larger fabric. One that stretched across generations. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Zara felt a quiet resolve settle over her. The night had brought chaos and conflict. But it had also illuminated truths that could no longer be ignored. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was standing for something larger. Something that couldn't be silenced by a single voice of doubt. And that, she thought, was worth every step forward.